Predicting who's going to be good in an NFL season can often be a fool's errand. But one of the things that does tend to stay the same year to year is offense, especially when there's continuity with coaching and quarterbacking. So with that in mind, we look at the 2023 schedule for the Green Bay Packers. Plus, we know 2023 is an inflection point for Jordan Love. But what about the rest of the 2020 Packers draft class? Their success or failure could well set up the Packers next several seasons. All of that on today's show.
You are Locked On Packers, your daily Green Bay Packers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Packers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Peter Bukowski, and I cover the Packers for The Leap, a newsletter I would love for you to subscribe to. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts. Wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers, the #1 Packers podcast on the internet, and the show for fans who know what happened. They want to know why and how. Thanks to everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. We hope you like starting your day with us as much as we like starting our day with you. And today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. So I have seen plenty of analysis of the schedule, and I think Vegas win totals tends to be a better projection of where teams are than, say, last year's outcomes. But defense, especially, is volatile. It changes year to year, even week to week in season. In fact, Ben Baldwin over The Athletic, who I know is not everyone's favorite in terms of Packer fans, he found that performance for defense in the first 6 to 8 games is really not correlated to defensive performance in the final 8 games. And over time, defensive performance is more correlated to opponent. So if we can't really project who's going to have a good defense, can we project who's going to have a good offense? And the answer is, it's at least better we can with offense than defense. We went through the quarterbacks last week. And as I sit down to do this, I was pretty surprised when I went back and looked at the data. Who was in the top in DVOA, who was in the top in EPA per play and success rate, and things that are predictive and things that I care about. There are 7 teams, 7 on the Packers schedule, who were in the top half, who were above league average in DVOA. And it's probably not the 7 teams you're thinking of. Okay, the Chiefs are easy. The Lions are easy. After that, it gets weird. It gets truly weird. Like, the New York Giants were 10th in offensive DVOA. The Atlanta Falcons were 13th in offensive DVOA. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers, 16th. And the Raiders, 17th. The Steelers, 18th. Teams not above league average on the Packers schedule by DVOA. The Chargers with Justin Herbert. The Vikings with Justin Jefferson, Dalvin Cook, and TJ Hawkinson. The Rams, although Matthew Stafford was hurt part of the year. And the Broncos, though that's not surprising, with Russell Wilson. It is unlikely. And I know that, like, Sean Payton showed up in Denver. It is unlikely that the Broncos will take a significant step forward offensively. Russell Wilson was not hurt last year. The offensive line was not absolutely murdering them last year. The receivers were not all injured or inconsistent last year. Russell Wilson played really bad. And yes, there were some institutional problems. Nathaniel Hackett not exactly wrapping himself in glory, but Russ was bad. And so as you look at this group, the Chiefs are going to be really good again. The Lions are probably going to be good again. The Giants, I kind of don't know what to think. Is Brian Daboll just that good? Are they going to be as healthy as they were along the offensive line? Is Saquon going to be able to hold up for another season? Is he going to play differently because of the long-term flexibility that he does or doesn't have? In this case, doesn't. Can Daniel Jones sustain his lack of turnovers? Okay, these are questions. The Falcons are going to start Desmond Ridder for the entire season. We have no idea what that looks like. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers lose Tom Brady, and they replace him with Baker Mayfield, who has been, over the last 2 seasons, one of the 3 or 4 worst quarterbacks in football. I don't expect the Buccaneers to end the season in this group. They're probably going down. The Raiders were on the list of above average players, or above average teams. Well, they lose Derek Carr. And I know you say, well, Derek Carr's not great. Derek Carr was at least going to play every game. And Davante Adams was a big part of the offense. And Josh Jacobs was a big part of the offense. Josh Jacobs probably not going to sustain what he put on tape last year. It was by far his best season. It was an outlier season for him. And Jimmy Garoppolo has just never shown an ability to stay healthy. Why should we expect Jimmy Garoppolo to not only come in and do what Derek Carr did, especially pushing the ball vertically? Davante Adams has already expressed his trepidation at how they're going to allow or force Jimmy Garoppolo to play, which is an extension of his own role in this offense. And then you look down the list, the Saints, they get Derek Carr, but they had Andy Dalton last year. Andy Dalton played pretty well. Like Andy Dalton, if you look at EPA per play and some of these other numbers, he was better than Derek Carr last year. You can make a reasonable argument that Derek Carr is a downgrade from what Andy Dalton was, and in fact was last year. Derek Carr was worse than Andy Dalton last year. Now, maybe that's because the infrastructure in New Orleans is just that good. I'm dubious of that. And I think you can make the case the Rams are going to be better. Sean McVay, Cooper Kupp stays healthy. Matthew Stafford plays the full season, but are we sure Matthew Stafford is going to play the full season? Why would we be sure of that? He's had injuries his entire career, and yes, he's played through a lot of them, but now we're talking about what they've considered a baseball injury. And you're like, that is not something you ever want to hear when it comes to your quarterback. A baseball injury? No, thank you. Now, they avoided having Tommy John, but like that is a problem. That is a problem. There were questions about if he was even going to come back. Now, he did, but under what circumstances? The Vikings lose Dalvin Cook, or are going to lose Dalvin Cook. We have no idea. The Chargers are going to be installing an entirely new offense. So you assume Justin Herbert is going to be able to single-handedly make them better, but he didn't last year. And granted, he was hurt, but they can't rely on Keenan Allen to be consistently healthy. They can't rely on Mike Williams to be consistently healthy. They can't rely probably on Quentin Johnson to come in and be an immediate impact player for them, and they're reshuffling their offensive line. Now, I know what you're going to say. But Peter, let me introduce you to this guy I know named Joe Barry. And to that I say, I get it. I get it. But the weird thing about the Joe Barry tenure is he has always been able to make the good quarterbacks look a little less good. You go back to 2021, they were at their best against Patrick Mahomes, against Russell Wilson, against Kyler Murray on the road, Patrick Mahomes on the road, against Joe Burrow, against Jimmy Garoppolo in the playoffs. When that team needed it, they got it from Joe Barry. This team, and I've made the case, I think is more talented than last year's team, and they were a top 10 passing defense last year. How many of the offenses that I listed are elite offenses because they run the ball so effectively? Well, the Giants, in part. The Lions, though they lose Jamal Williams and trade DeAndre Swift, they're going to be relying on Jahmyr Gibbs, a rookie, David Montgomery, who I thought was an overpriced signing. The Falcons run the ball. Now, that's potentially problematic. But they're going to be playing Desmond Ridder, who I don't know. What have we seen from Desmond Ridder that makes you believe he is a quality quarterback? Now, this is precisely the problem with Joe Barry, though. At times, He has made average quarterbacks look like good quarterbacks. He made Ryan Tannehill look like a Pro Bowler last year. Part of that was just guys didn't play well, but it was also planned. Jair Alexander talked after the game like, yeah, we focused all week, short week, on stopping Derrick Henry, that we really didn't have a good plan for their passing game. Well, Jair, you also gave up 2 deep shot passes to practice squad receivers. Like, they just didn't play well. They didn't bring the intensity. And this brings me to a point that I think is really important for this season. This Packers team is not championship quality. They're not a contender to win a Super Bowl. Not really. Could things break right? Is there a scenario you can envision where Jordan Love just steps in and is awesome and Christian Watson takes that next leap and the defense plays to its potential? Like, they have the talent on the team where at the end of the year, it wouldn't be shocking because of the talent, but you wouldn't predict it. It would be surprising, right? But because they aren't preseason championship favorites, don't they have to come out every week with a little bit more urgency? Doesn't the defense have to play with a little bit more intensity, knowing Aaron Rodgers is not there to bail him out? Does that change the way you approach any of this? And I think the answer is it has to. It has to. And if it doesn't, then you need a cultural realignment in this organization. You don't have the right people, whether it's on the coaching staff, whether it's in that locker room. If you can't get up every week, the Packers have to go into every game believing they can win because they can win any game that they play. But there is no longer this backstop. There is no longer the 4-time MVP who can ride in on his shiny white horse and save the day. So there's no starting slow. There's no lethargic first quarters. This really has to be all gas, no brake. But it's on Matt LaFleur. It's on Joe Barry. It's on Jordan Love and David Bakhtiari and Kenny Clark and Aaron Jones and Jair Alexander and Devondre Campbell and Darnell Savage to set the tone each and every week so that it is the case. All right, we're going to talk about the 2020 draft class coming up in just a second. But before we do, today's episode brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. FanDuel is where I like to spend a lot of time, especially on a Sunday. On a Sunday like PGA Championship Sunday, for example, because I want to see the latest odds. I want to bet these things in real time. That's the fun stuff. That's where we're really cooking with gas, is live betting the PGA Championship. I had a lot of fun doing that, and you can do it. You can do it even if you don't fully understand everything that's going on. That's why FanDuel is giving you a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's right. If you don't hit the bet, you get your money back in free bets. That is a wonderful, glorious thing. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get a no sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. And thanks for making Locked On Packers your first listen every day. Everydayers. Coming up this week on the show, more rookie orientation and a lot more on trying to figure out what this team is going to look like coming up in the 2023 season. Maybe another Aaron Rodgers signature series, working on the schedules for all of that coming up in the weeks and months as we lead into the 2023 NFL season. So this was brought up by Eric Eager, our pal from Pro Football Focus, about players who are going to get second contracts from the 2023 draft class. And this is, I think, one of the most simple ways to evaluate the quality of a draft pick. Does this player get a second contract either with their team or a sizable second contract somewhere else? Because just because a team does not pay a player doesn't mean that they don't think they're good, or it doesn't mean that they aren't good. If you go on free agency and get a bunch of money, that's good. Like Allen Lazard, the Packers didn't keep Allen Lazard precisely because the market for him was just going to be too great. They didn't keep Marquez Valdes-Scantling precisely because he was going to command more on the open market than Green Bay was willing to pay. You could say that that makes it a miss, or you can just say, look, a receiver who gets $10 million in the open market is good. And you were good for bringing that player in. Now, Jordan Love already got his 5th-year option. We don't need to quibble over the difference between the contract that he ultimately signed and the literal 5th-year option. That's not the point. He got an extension. He's going to get that 5th year. We'll see beyond that. And we know coming into this season, the referendum that this is for Jordan Love on his selection. We know that. He needs to show something. He doesn't have to be perfect. He doesn't have to come in and be Patrick Mahomes, but come in and be like what Baker Mayfield was early in his career in Cleveland. It's one of the reasons why I am so bullish on the Packers this season is I look around the league and I see Baker Mayfield going to the playoffs with the Browns behind Nick Chubb and some turnovers on defense. I see Ryan Tannehill going to the playoffs, now, albeit in a lousy division, but on the back of Derrick Henry and some guile and some defensive intensity. I see Kirk Cousins and that team go to the playoffs every year. I saw Jared Goff go to a Super Bowl. I saw Jimmy Garoppolo go to a Super Bowl. I saw Bryce Purdy go to the NFC Championship game. I saw Jalen Hurts, proto Jalen Hurts, pre-MVP candidate Jalen Hurts, when really all he could do was run. Help a team go 9-7 and go to the playoffs. Like, that's a real thing. It has never been easier to play the position. If he is the reason that they're not losing games, he doesn't have to be the reason they're winning games consistently, but as long as he's not the reason they're losing games, that's a pretty good first step, because you don't expect him to be everything that he's going to be right away. You want to see the flashes of that talent, which we've seen more and more now, the more opportunities we've gotten to play. I don't want to get into some of the wailing and gnashing of teeth that was done on local radio in Wisconsin over the weekend and last week about Jordan Love and certain people crying about how can anyone think that he's going to be good based on such little information. Like, it's always funny to me that people who don't know ball complain that how could anyone else possibly understand ball? It's just like one of those funny things. And look, this is true of a lot of people in sports media, unfortunately, that they don't take the time to learn the game. Like, they just don't. And so they think it is this black box that is unknowable. And it's like, well, that's not actually true. There's a lot of people who know, but that's a different thing. So AJ Dillon is an interesting question about, is he going to get a second contract? Because they're paying Aaron Jones. And when they drafted AJ Dillon, a lot of people, myself included, went a second round pick for a second running back. And you could have just paid Jamal Williams. And then you could have just paid Jamal Williams again this offseason. Like, those guys are always available for a couple $1 million. David Montgomery, like, I think AJ Dillon is a better player, but how much better? And at the opportunity cost of a second round pick where you could have had a pass catcher, you go back and look, and they didn't have great options at that point, but it didn't make a ton of sense to me. That being said, AJ Dillon has been a very productive running back in the Packers system, and Matt LaFleur has said that they want 2-3 guys that they can rely on. Can he get the Jamal Williams kind of contract that he signed in Detroit? Aaron Jones just extended. So he's probably going to be on this team in 2024. So what is the AJ Dillon contract worth? AJ Dillon loves Green Bay, loves the Packers, is the kind of player you want in December and January. Like, there are still Packer fans going, the Packers beat the 49ers if AJ Dillon doesn't get hurt on playing special teams. And maybe they're right, by the way. So I can understand if they let him walk. The reason I don't think they will is the Packers drafted AJ Dillon knowing Aaron Jones and Jamal Williams were going to be free agents. They were all on the team at the same time. Now, maybe the Packers believe, hey, we can just get a rookie in here and it doesn't really matter. But if Jordan Love is good, are you really going to just hand the offense over to this rookie? Now, if Aaron Jones is going to be on the team, then it doesn't really matter. If Aaron Jones is going to be on the team for 2 more years, you actually can wait until next year to draft that player. Maybe Lou Nichols, who we talked about last week with America's Guest, Jason Hirschhorn, ends up being that guy. I think they are willing to bring A.J. Dillon back. Now, whether or not they actually do is a question, but I can see it. Josiah DeGuara is another great example because I certainly see the case for just moving on. He has not shown an ability to tilt the field in any way. I think his leadership is important. The coaches have talked about it unprompted. And he can be your sort of, Mercedes Lewis light, where he's on the team to just be a guy who goes about his business the right way. He's there to help younger Packers understand what it means to carry the G, what it means to be a part of the Packer way. And you probably don't have to give him very much money to do that. A couple million, 3 years, 10. That seems eminently reasonable to me. And I don't think anyone's going to give him more than that. And so he's worth more to the Packers than anyone else, even with Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave in the building, because you're still going to need a guy who you can trust to block, to know the formations, to play the H-back, and to play some special teams. Like, tight end 3 is not a highly valuable position. I think we can say pretty unequivocally that was not a great pick value-wise. But that doesn't mean he's not helpful for your football team, and that doesn't mean that there isn't a number where he makes sense to keep him. I think there's only one other player who is going to get a new deal, a meaningful deal. Apparently, Jake Hansen already got an extra year on his deal. John Runyan Jr., I'm a little bit concerned about his place on this team because you heard Zach Tom could be in there at right guard. He could be competing at center. He could be competing at right tackle. I think that tells you that they're willing to upgrade from John Runyan if they see an opportunity to upgrade. But this feels a little Lucas Patrick-y to me because the Packers extended Lucas Patrick. He was at that time a backup center, backup guard, sort of swing interior offensive lineman, and they end up paying him enough that he ends up starting and is a really good value, and then they move on from him because he just ends up playing his way off the team, basically. You've invested enough on this offensive line now where you have other guys. Zach Tom can credibly start at either guard spot, so can Elton Jenkins. You have Sean Ryan. We don't know what he is yet, but you have him. You have Josh Myers. Now it sounds like they're not necessarily sold there. Maybe John Runyan, who has some experience playing center, could win that job. I don't see that either. But in a year, when David Bakhtiari is not on this team, maybe what they want to do is slide Elton Jenkins out to tackle. Or maybe what they want to do is to play Zach Tom at left tackle. You have Yosh Nijman at right tackle. And if Sean Ryan isn't ready, you have a big problem. If Josh Myers also is not the guy long term, now you have a problem along the interior. I think John Runyan has shown enough to warrant a second contract in the same range that you paid Lucas Patrick, that high-end swing interior offensive lineman kind of money. Now, that's not going to be a lot of money, and that's okay. Not every extension that is valuable to your team is 3 years, $60 million. Like, that's just not necessary. You can have a lot of really valuable players on your team who are there, who are either break glass in case of emergency or just like solid guys. It's useful to have solid guys on your team, turns out. And so I think he could certainly be there in terms of getting a contract. Now, a lot of these guys, like Kamal Martin's already off the team. Simon Stepanek doesn't play football. Vernon Scott is off the team. I think Jonathan Garvin is in trouble to make this roster. So this was not a banger draft in terms of high impact players. But here's the thing. None of it matters if Jordan Love is good. If Jordan Love is good, none of it matters. It's sort of like in 2018, you got Jair Alexander and a future first round pick. Jair Alexander became one of the 3 or 4 best corners in the league. It kind of doesn't matter that Josh Jackson was terrible. It kind of doesn't matter that Oren Burks was never able to be a starter. It kind of doesn't matter that Equinemius St. Brown and these flyers that you took on day 3 were not all that impactful for you. Although Equanimeous St. Brown played real snaps for the Packers, 18, 19, 20, even 21. MVS, of course, was a big piece of this offense in terms of his gravity and the geometry of making it all work, his ability to stretch the seam vertically. Again, the Packers didn't re-sign him, not because they didn't think he was a useful, good player, but because his skill set was actually so valuable to the league that the Packers didn't feel like they could justify paying the money that someone else was going to pay him. And that's exactly what the Kansas City Chiefs did. The Chiefs didn't win a Super Bowl because of MVS, but he helped. He helped. But that draft could end up being like this one, only 2020 could be even more impactful because the position. If Jordan Love is like the 12th best quarterback in the league, it's an awesome draft because you move on from Aaron Rodgers and now you have a good, above average quarterback. That is, it would outkick the value of every other player you could draft there being just as good. Like a B quarterback. If you had drafted B players at even premium positions, like 3 or 4 of them are not as impactful as the B quarterback. They're just not. So that's what we're waiting on. But if A.J. Dillon can become a guy that you can rely on and make some money, if John Runyon Jr. can be a legit, like this guy's a no doubt starting guard, like he gets in these competitions with Zach Tom and Sean Ryan and is clearly better than them, not because those guys are bad, but because he has continued to improve. That is really, really valuable for the Packers, even if that's a non-premium position. And then, of course, it all hinges on Jordan Love. And that's just the reality anytime you take a quarterback. All right, before we finish up here, thanks for everyone who makes Locked On Packers their first listen every day. Everydayers, we've got so much fun stuff coming up for you. Jason Hirschhorn is manning the Leap for the moment, but go subscribe to that. I'm on like mini paternity leave from the Leap. I'm still doing Locked On Packers. Locked On Sports today restarted with me today. So we're back at it, doing it there. Go subscribe, check all that stuff out. I would really appreciate it. All right, back the rest of the week. Normal schedule. We're still doing all these shows all the time because I love doing the shows and because the offseason is when we make our money. The offseason is when this show really becomes for the everydayers. It's easy to want to be involved every day in September, in October, in November, December, January. But in May, in June, in early July, that is for your true everydayer. That is for your just football sickos. And guess what? That's me. So I am going to be here every day. It is not Locked On Packers, your team, some of the days. It is every day. So we will continue to be here every day. Follow me on Twitter, Peter_Bukowski. Follow the podcast on Twitter, Locked On Packers. Like us on Facebook. Subscribe to the podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcasts, wherever you find podcasts, you will find Locked On Packers. And anytime you want to come hang out live, we're going to do that on YouTube, our Locked On Packers YouTube page, so you can stay Locked On Packers.